you're like, there's a lot more people doing what we're doing that we didn't realize. And I remember him saying, I think we could do like a sports ministry conference and bring people together. And if you guys know Phil, this won't surprise you. He's like, yeah, it might start small, but we'll end up being at Madison Square Garden. And I'm like, that's so Phil, right? If you know Phil, that's so Phil, man. He's got the vision, he's got the passion for it, but he's got the faith to match it too. So appreciate you, Phil. Great heart for people, heart for God. I've taught for 13 years. I was a high school teacher for 13 years, so I got a PowerPoint. So sorry, I apologize for that. But got my notes on here. So I saw what happened to Nance, so I'm not trying to get the clock up here. So I'm gonna use my notes to stay on task and make sure we're staying on track here. So it's not about me. I'm not going to talk a lot about my ministry, but I just want to share so you kind of can get an idea of where I'm coming from with my context. So I started Crossover Hoops in 2010, so it's been like 13 years. And man, it started off just I wanted to invest in some kids, and I wanted to work with some players after school, things like that. And my wife has a lot more wisdom than I do, and she's like, you can use this as a ministry opportunity. And I was like, yeah, I think I can. That's a great idea. So we came up with the logo, called it Crossover Hoops, and man, God has just like blessed it beyond anything I ever would have imagined. It kind of happened by accident, but we've been able to share the gospel with thousands of kids over the years through camps and different trainings and stuff like that. I've seen kids get saved, impacting their families starting to go back to church, all these different things that God has done through that ministry, and it's just been a blessing to see and be a part of. So that's really all you need to know. God did that. I did not do that. This is not about me. I've been excited about this. I had a lot of different topics to talk about. I had to narrow my focus to get it down to 25 minutes. So we're going to have to get after it to get through everything here. So the first thing I want to start with, I don't have a clicker or nothing. Will you go to the next slide? The first thing I want to start off with, this is one of my favorite quotes. You guys may have heard it before. It's from a great book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. Have you guys ever heard that before? Yeah. You've probably heard it, right? So I love that, man, and there's so much wisdom in that. And I think it's really easy sometimes to let the main thing slip through the cracks, right? We're pulled in a lot of different directions. We have so many things going on, and sometimes the main thing isn't the main thing. So with that, that's kind of going to be the theme. That's kind of going to be the main thing we're going to talk about. And with that in mind, I have a couple questions. Okay, and I know there's a lot of different contexts in here. Like some of you guys might be coaches, some of you may be trainers, running leagues, whatever it is. So whatever your context is, I want you to apply everything we talk about to your specific context. All right, so the first question I have for you is, why do you coach or train or teach or whatever it is? Okay, so why do you do that? That's pretty predictable, right? You hear that a lot. Go to the next slide for me. So somebody, Phil, why do you do what you do with Hoops for Christ?
I use basketball to share the gospel.
Easy, simple. Robo?
Steward my testimony.
Awesome. Good. Matt? He was looking down. He's like, don't call on me.
I started thinking already. Share the love of God with everyone.
Okay, good. So we could go around the room. I got to point to this, I promise, all right? We could go around the room, and none of those were great answers. None of those were about your sport, right? And we could survey thousands of coaches, even non-believers, okay? Believers, non-believers, we could survey thousands of people, and I guarantee it that almost every answer would not be sport-specific, okay? Nobody said, I coach because I love to win, right? We do. I mean, I'm as competitive as anybody, right? We want to win, but, that's not why you coach. Okay, you coach because you love people, you want to pour into people. Every answer usually is about relationships, about people. Okay, so that's why we do what we do. But a lot of times that can slip through the cracks, right? We say that's the main thing, but we don't always make that the main thing. So that's really what we're going to talk about. So that leads me to the next question, if you want to go to the next slide. So if that's the main thing, how much time do you spend developing a strategy to intentionally cultivate those things, right? So like I said, you could interview or survey thousands of coaches. They say character development or if they're not a believer, they might say like to teach life lessons, or just to give kids opportunities, whatever those things are, whatever your main thing is, sharing the gospel, sharing the love of Christ, your testimony. Like, if that's the main thing, how much time are you spending cultivating that, like investing into that? So that's kind of my challenge for you. And let's be honest, like, sometimes we say something's the main thing and it isn't. Okay, because there's a lot of distractions. We're pulled in a lot of different directions. So I don't know if you guys can relate to this or not, but in Romans, if you want to go to the next one, in Romans, Paul says, I do not understand what I'm doing because I do not practice what I want to do, but I do what I hate. Can anybody else relate to that? Like there's what you want to do, and sometimes there's a gap between what you want to do and what you actually do, right? There's a gap between who you want to be and who you actually are. There's a gap, and I don't know, I want to close that gap. Like I want to be intentional about closing that gap, okay, between my intentions and my actions. So, an example of this, have you ever met someone who's like, family is the most important thing to me? Like family over everything. They maybe have family like tattooed on them somewhere. And then that same person will do anything to not spend time with their family, right? Like they fill their schedule, they're busy, right? And when they are with their family, they're not intentional because they're just scrolling on their phone, whatever the case, you know what I'm saying? So like they say one thing, but their life and the way they live their life is completely different. So Chip Ingram, I don't know if you guys know Chip Ingram. He's a pastor. I like to listen to his sermons. He was a hooper, so I relate to him. And he has this thing he says quite a bit, and it's really impacted me. If you go to the next slide, that's the next quote. Yep, you got it already. You're on it. He said, you can say that you value whatever you want, but show me your bank account and your calendar, and I'll know what you truly value. And like that has impacted me a lot, right? It challenges me because I think there's a lot of wisdom and there's a lot of truth in that. Where we put our resources and where we put our time really says a lot about what we really value. So I've been doing sports ministry for like 13 years, and I get that there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. Okay, there's so many things on the sports side or on the business side or whatever the case is. Okay, there's tons of stuff. Go to the next one for me. You guys ever feel like that? Yeah. I can relate to this. I feel like this a lot, right? If you're a coach, you got your practice plans, you got your scouting report, you got to watch film, you're looking at stats, you got to report the stats, you got media, you got to communicate with parents, your administration. Like there's so many things. It's pulling you all over the place. Okay, if you're a trainer, you got scheduling your stuff, promoting your stuff, right? Coming up with curriculum. Like, I mean, there's just so much, and it's pulling you in so many different directions. And I get it, like those things are important. I'm not up here telling you that those things are not important, because they are. But if this is a sports ministry conference, if really the main thing is to share the gospel, okay, we can't let those things occupy all of our time to where we're letting the main thing slip through the cracks. So I get it. It's a lot. Okay, and I think something that we need to do is put more thought into it. Okay, put more thought into it. Next slide. Another great quote. I like quotes if you can't tell. Another great quote, Eric Geiger, Designed to Lead. I suggest you read this book. It's a great book. He says, without a system, all you have is wishful thinking. Without a system, all you have is wishful thinking. I've had a lot of times where I've had, great intentions, but if you don't have a system in place, it makes it difficult to reach that and to do that. Okay, so yeah, I mean, keep the main thing the main thing. Those things don't happen by accident. Okay, you have to be intentional about them. Nance talked about being intentional. Okay, I believe that the Christian life is an intentional life. So with that being said, I got another question for you. Okay, this is the last question. All right, so what is your philosophy of ministry? So this is a ministry, sports ministry conference. Okay, we got a lot of sports people in here. Okay, I'm a basketball guy. I don't know anything about any other sport, so I'm just going to talk basketball. Okay, most coaches could spend hours, literally hours, talking about their offensive philosophy or their defensive philosophy, or people can talk about their business philosophy. Okay, in basketball, you have coaches who are so into their philosophy, man. Like, they'll talk for hours about it. They'll swear by run and jump defense or pack line or lock left or, whatever these things are, and they'll argue about it. And there can be some intense conversations about it. I don't know if you've ever met anybody who thinks that icing the ball screen is the only way to guard the ball screen. And, like, they're absolutely disgusted that you would even like, think about guarding it another way. You know what I'm talking about? Some of you are laughing, and some of you are that person, probably, if you're not laughing. You're like, no, right? Okay. For trainers, there's a lot of different philosophies of skill development, right? Okay, Gannon's not here. He'd get fired up if we started talking about some of that, right? So there's a lot of different philosophies out there, and my question to you and my challenge to you is, could you talk for that long about your philosophy of ministry? Are you that passionate about your philosophy of ministry? Have you put that much time and thought and effort into your philosophy of ministry as you have your sport philosophy, your offensive philosophy, your defensive philosophy, maybe your business model, your business plan? So again, I think that's a challenge for me. It's a challenge for you. And if we're in sports ministry, we should be intentional about that, and we should put thought and effort and time into developing a philosophy of ministry where we're not letting the main thing slip through the cracks, because the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. So I got another quote. I love quotes, man. So Jonathan Edwards, great preacher, theologian, and he said, God created our desires, passions, and emotions, and he did not intend us to lose those at conversion. So this was somebody said earlier, Phil said this earlier. He said back in the day, like, once you got saved, it was like you didn't play sports anymore. But God gave you your passions and desires, and he made you the way you are so that you can use those things for his kingdom. Okay, so to finish the quote, God created our desires, passions, and emotions. He did not intend us to lose those at conversion, but he wants us to direct them away from sin and towards God. So we should pursue excellence. Okay, we should be passionate. We should be driven. Okay, those are not bad things. We should be that, but we should use that and direct it at God. Okay, we should use it for him and not for us. We should build his kingdom, not our kingdom. And if we're being honest, if I'm going to keep it real, that's hard sometimes. Okay, it's really hard sometimes. It's easy to get it twisted. It's easy to fall into pride, fall into greed, jealousy, like all of those different things. So one of my favorite proverbs is Proverbs 4:23. It was written by Solomon, who was the wisest man who ever lived. And I love this proverb. It says, guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. The wisest man who ever lived, and he says, above all else, guard your heart, because it determines the course of your life. And there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot of wisdom in that, okay? But that would be my suggestion to anybody who's in sports ministry, even not in sports ministry, in your life. Like, just guard your heart, okay? Guard your heart against selfishness. Guard your heart against greed. Guard your heart against pride. Guard your heart against jealousy. Guard your heart against lust. Guard your heart against idols. Guard your heart because it determines the course of your life. And I think it's important for us to do that. I think it's important for us to remember that when it comes to our sports ministry. And like you were talking about at the other conference, like that competitive, like we're all competitors, that competitive nature, right? But like, guard your heart. What's the main thing? You got to remember that. So I think it's safe to assume two things. If you're here, you love sports, and you feel called to use your sport for ministry. Okay, so I think everybody in here I can safely say those two things. And I do not have all the answers, and I'm excited to learn and grow this weekend, but there's one thing that I know for sure, and that's that the Christian life is an intentional life. I said that earlier. I say that all the time. The Christian life is an intentional life. In Romans 12:2, Paul says not to conform to the ways and customs of this world. Okay, we're called to be intentional about the way we live. And I think that's really important. And that's not just for your ministry, that's for your life. With your family, whatever it is you're doing, like we're called to be intentional with the way we live. Proverbs 14:8. This one is also written by Solomon. He says, the wisdom of the prudent is to give thought to their ways. And that's like a verse that I live by. The wisdom of the prudent is to give thought to their ways. And I challenge each person, don't just do things because that's how you've always done it. Okay, how many times has that happened?
That's a good word.
It's like, hey, why do you do this? I don't know, I've always done it that way, I don't know. Or my coach did it that way. Or whatever the case is, don't do things just because that's what everybody else is doing. Don't do it because that's the way it's always been done. Give thought to your ways in your ministry, in your family. So I challenge you guys to do that in all areas of your life. So Nehemiah. I was reading in Nehemiah the other day. Nehemiah 1 and 2. We're going to go through this quickly. I was reading it, and it just really relates to what we're talking about. And Nehemiah gave thought to his ways. He depended on God. He was a man of God. He was seeking God, but he also gave thought to his ways, and he prepared himself. So I'm going to quickly kind of summarize chapter 1, and then I'm going to read a passage in chapter 2. There's about 12 sermons in here, so we're skipping over a lot of stuff. But basically, so in chapter 1, to give you a little bit of context, Nehemiah was in exile in Persia. He was in the city of Susa in Persia, and like we see many times in the Bible with Joseph, with Daniel, he was elevated to a prominent position, even though he was in exile in a pagan nation. Okay, he was elevated to a prominent position. He was actually the cupbearer to the king of Persia, King Artaxerxes. All right, and for some cultural context of that time, okay, kings were paranoid. They were kind of paranoid because they thought that someone might assassinate them, try to take over their kingdom, okay? And they would choose someone who was very wise, who was very diligent, who was very trustworthy to be their cupbearer, okay? And they basically protected the king, because if someone tried to assassinate him through poisoning them through their drink or their food, they basically watched over the whole palace. Like, where did you get the groceries from? Who prepared this? Right? Like all these things, like they had to oversee all of that. They had to be very wise, very diligent, okay? And he was chosen for that because he had those qualities. He was a trustworthy man who pursued God. Okay, some other things we see here. So he's an Israelite in exile, and they come, he gets word that Jerusalem, the walls have been broken down, the gates have been burned, and Jerusalem is in danger. And it says, like, he's devastated. And it says that he starts weeping. Okay, so he's weeping, and it says that he began fasting and praying. Okay, he was seeking the Lord, and he even records a prayer here. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he repents of his sin. Okay, he recognizes God's sovereignty, and he humbly requests that he could do something about this, that he could go and rebuild the walls in Jerusalem. Okay? Now, I want you to realize how crazy that seems. Okay? He's a slave in a pagan nation, and Susa is 800 miles from Jerusalem. So that'd be like from here to New York City. Okay? And he couldn't just jump on a plane. Okay, he didn't have a nice air-conditioned car to get in. There wasn't a McDonald's at every exit, right? So put yourself in that place. You're a slave in a pagan nation 800 miles away from Jerusalem, and you're fasting and you're praying to God, believing that he's going to give you an opportunity to go there and rebuild the walls. Like, that sounds crazy, doesn't it? That sounds crazier than Madison Square Garden, Phil. Right? So, I mean, that just seems crazy. So he's praying for this. He's fasting. And so then we pick up in 2. Okay, so chapter 2, I'm going to read a little bit here. So during the month of Nisan in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes. So basically, from context, that's about 4 months after he found out. Wine was set before him. He gave it to the king. He said, I had never been sad in his presence. So the king said to me, why are you sad when you aren't sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart. So the king recognizes that something's off. And he's like, why is he acting weird? Okay, like he recognizes it. And Nehemiah says, I was overwhelmed with fear. He was overwhelmed with fear. Okay? I'm just guessing here, but he had probably seen the king do some pretty harsh stuff to people, right? And the king's like, why are you acting funny? You just handed me this cup and you're acting funny. And he replies to the king. He says, may the king live forever. Like, he was scared, and he's like, my allegiance is to you. May the king live forever. Okay, there's nothing to be suspicious about. He says, but why would I not be sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Okay, so he tells him what's wrong. He tells him what's on his heart. The king asked me, what is your request? So he said, what is your request? And he was prepared. He said, so he says, so I prayed to the God of heaven. So imagine this. For 4 months you've been fasting and praying, looking for this opportunity. And the king asks you, what is your request? And this is your opportunity. And I love this because this shows who Nehemiah was. He stopped and he prayed in that moment before he responded, right? Like, I can learn from that. Like, that's something that I can learn from. He was a man of God, and he stopped and he prayed. And then he answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor with you, send me to Judah and to the city where my ancestors are buried, so that I may rebuild it. Okay, so he gives his request. The king with the queen seated beside him asked me, how long will your journey take, and when will you return? Okay, so this is where it could have gone real bad. If Nehemiah hadn't prepared and thought through everything and made a plan, imagine what would have happened if he said, I don't know, I haven't really thought about it that much. Right? What would have happened? He probably wouldn't have had the opportunity. Okay, he'd been praying for this, but he also prepared. It says, I gave him a definite time. Like, he knew how long it would take him to get there. He knew how long it would take him to build the wall. He knew how long it would take him to get back. It says he gave him a definite time. He had planned this out. He had thought about it. And it pleased the king to send me. I also said to the king, so that wasn't it. He didn't just know how long it would take. He also said to the king, if it pleases the king, let me have letters written to the governors of the regions west of the Euphrates River, so that they will grant me safe passage until I reach Judah. And let me have a letter written to Asaph, keeper of the king's forest, so that he will give me timber to rebuild the gates of the temple's fortress, the city wall, and the home where I will live. The king granted my request, and the gracious hand of my God was on me. So, like, you can tell there he had been planning. Like, he knew everything. He's like, I need a letter so I can get safely through this part. I need a letter for this so I can get the material. The king sent him, if you keep reading, he requested that the king send him with people. Okay, like for 4 months, he had been thinking about this. He was praying about it. It seemed impossible, but he planned anyway, and he prepared. Okay, and there's a great short little parable here that goes along with it. 2 farmers pray for rain. Okay, you might have heard this before. 2 farmers prayed for rain, but only one went out to prepare his field to receive it. Okay, which one trusted God for the rain? Okay, God will send the rain when he's ready. But it's our responsibility to prepare the field. Okay, we need to put thought into it. It's like what Phil said, we plant the seed, God causes the increase. But we need to be intentional to plant the seed. Okay, so I don't have much time left, but with the time I have left, I'm a practical application guy. Okay, so like, knowledge is great, but true wisdom is taking the knowledge and being able to apply it. Okay, so You want to go to the next one for me? Okay, it's right, yeah. So I challenge you to come up with a philosophy of ministry, right? Like you can talk all day long about offensive philosophy, defensive philosophy, sports philosophy, okay? But I really challenge you to put time in, do some research, develop a philosophy of ministry. And for me, I think a good, simple place to start is to look at the 5 functions of the church. Okay, you can find these in Acts 2, 42 through 45. I'm not going to read through there. You can look at that on your own and do some research on it. But so real quick, the 5, evangelism. Evangelism, you guys probably know, is just sharing the gospel with non-believers. Okay, sharing the gospel with non-believers. Discipleship. Discipleship is when a lot of times we make a profession of faith when someone gets saved, the finish line. Like we're like, oh, they're saved, they're good now. But we should really make it the starting line. They're a new creation, they're born again, right? They need to grow, they need to learn, they need to develop. So discipleship is taking a believer and encouraging them and training them to grow, okay? Fellowship, community of believers doing life together. So Romans 12 says we should rejoice with those who rejoice, we should weep with those who weep, okay? Fellowship is a community, coming alongside one another, sharing one another's burdens. Ministry is service. It's contributing to not only the body of Christ, but the outside community. Okay? And worship. I could talk for a while on worship. It's not just singing. Okay? Everybody thinks worship is just singing. The translation comes out to something like declaring God's worth. Okay? So there's a lot of ways we can do that, not just through singing. It's not just through worship music, but we can worship in a lot of different ways. So, when I think of ministry, including sports ministry, I think, how can we engage in these 5 things? Okay? How can we engage and be intentional and have a strategy to incorporate these 5 things into our ministry? Okay? So really quickly, just, you have a different context than me, but just to get some ideas flowing, okay? So for Crossover Hoops, evangelism, we share the gospel at every single thing we do. When I hire a trainer, I tell them, like, I literally never want a kid or anybody, a player, to come to anything we do and not hear the gospel. Like, no matter what, like, they're going to hear the gospel at every single thing we do. And the beautiful thing, just like you were saying, the beautiful thing about basketball is it gives us the opportunity to reach people that would never step foot in a church. I can't tell you how many people over the years I've shared the gospel with players that would never step foot in a church. College players, overseas pros, like, they come there for the training, but they're getting the gospel. And that just, it gives us the opportunity to do that. I remember one time, like, one of the first camps I did, like, it's been a while ago, and it changed my perspective forever. I shared the gospel. We handed out life books, like little Bibles, to all the kids, and this kid was probably in, like, 4th grade, and I was like, all right, let's pray. And he was like, what's that? And I was like, what's what? What are you talking about? And he's like, what's pray? What does that mean? And I was like, it just blew my mind, because I'm like, there's people in our own neighborhoods who have never heard the name of Jesus before, right? And he's there for basketball, but he's hearing the gospel. He's going home with a Bible, right? So evangelism is the first one. Sorry, I could go on all night. Discipleship is the second one. This one's a little bit trickier, because, like, for me, whenever we do camps, we travel around and do camps, and I might only see this kid once or twice a year. Right? So evangelism is easy, sharing the gospel, but discipleship, coming alongside them, helping them to grow. So you got to get creative with that. We did, like, if you're meeting with groups consistently, like 5 weeks, you're doing 10 sessions with them, pick a topic, teach them what the Bible says about that topic. That's discipleship. Okay? Probably the most effective thing that we did was we started an AAU program. We have 8 teams, 85 players, and our coaches are all believers. They're sharing devotionals at every practice. They're meeting with the kids individually. They're memorizing scripture together. Like, how can you incorporate discipleship in your context? Fellowship, I think that's an easy one. When you're around people, you're developing relationships with them, okay? But there's a surface relationship that's real easy, and then, like, how can you go deeper with them? Nance was talking about that. Like, how can you go deeper with them where you know what their background is, like what their family situation is, all these different things. So fellowship, having that community, getting to know them better. What are some ways you can do that? Coaches, I suggest doing individual meetings with your kids throughout the year. Have individual meetings with them. Don't even talk about basketball. Ask them about their family. Ask them about whatever. When they leave, type it out. Write it out. That way you can follow up the next time. Okay? Ministry. I'm going to land the plane here, Phil, I promise. Ministry is service, okay? So I think sometimes we miss this. Our AAU teams, they do 2 community service projects every season. Okay, they go out as a team, they do community service. Something I learned through doing camps and stuff, about 8 years ago, one of my clients was a middle school kid who got diagnosed with cancer. And I wanted to support the family, I wanted to help them, so we sold wristbands at all of our camps that whole year that said crossover hoops on them, and all that money went to the family. It was $3,000 I think we gave to them. It was a huge blessing. And from that time, every year we pick a different ministry to support. And we sell wristbands all through the year, and we raise money for them. So we've done homeless shelters. We've done like a local Christian adoption agency that funds adoptions. We've done food pantries, all kinds of stuff. Prison ministries. Just Go Ball. Okay, Robo's about to come up here. So anyway, how can you incorporate that in whatever your ministry is? And then last is worship. Again, it's not just music. Okay, whenever we use our gifts and abilities and our talents to glorify God and to point people to God, that can be a form of worship. I've heard Phil say that many times. Inside the 4 lines is where you worship. So we can teach the kids that. So anyway, hopefully this gives you some thoughts, some ideas. It's thought-provoking. And again, whatever your context is, I challenge you to give thought to your ways. I challenge you to develop a philosophy of ministry and be intentional about that. If that's really the main thing, we have to keep the main thing the main thing. So, all right, I'm done. It's been a blessing to share with you guys. I pray you're encouraged by this. Maybe it gave you some new ideas. And I'm excited about this weekend. I look forward. Hopefully I can meet each one of you guys. I'd love to meet you all and learn more about you. Like Phil said, coming to these conferences, one of the best things is meeting people, connecting, growing in relationships. So I'd love to meet you if I get a chance. So appreciate you guys. Thank you.